In this video, we're going to talk about the moon. Now, the moon is Earth's only natural satellite. Satellite is something that orbits around the Earth. It's our only natural satellite. It orbits the Earth every 27.3 days. So about once a month, we go through a full lunar cycle, a full moon cycle. The moon often appears to shine in our night sky, but in reality it's only reflecting the light from the sun. The moon doesn't create any light of its own. It's not like a star. It's basically a big mirror. The sun's rays come in, it hits the moon, and it reflects back on Earth. And what we see is just the sun's light reflecting on it. The moon's gravity is also responsible for our tides, the rising and the falling of our ocean levels. But we're going to deal with that in another video. Okay, so if the sun is way over here, the sun's rays come in and they light up half the moon. Half the moon is lit, half the moon is dark. But one of the things we have to be aware when we see a diagram like this is we have to know that the scale is way off, that the moon in this diagram is far bigger than it should be in comparison to Earth. So let's take a look at this picture right here, and this compares the various sizes. This is the sun in comparison to the itty bitty Earth and even smaller moon. So they're much smaller than the sun, and the sun is incredibly far away compared to where we're at. Depending on where the moon is in its orbit, we can see different amounts of the moon being lit. We've all looked up in the night sky before and we've seen a full moon, or we've seen what we think of as a moon shape, these crescent shapes. These have to do with where the moon is in its orbit around the Earth. So if I were to look and say this moon was orbited to right here, and this half is being lit, this half is in the dark. It's not being lit by the sun because the sun is way over here. From Earth, as we look up, we would only see the dark side of the moon. So to us, it would look like a new moon. There would be no light coming from the moon. It would be barely visible. Now, as it continued to orbit around the Earth, again, it takes 27.3 days to go all the way around. As it continues to orbit around the Earth, we would start to see a sliver of light appearing on the right-hand side. We like to say the right side is the light side, because after new moon, the light begins on the right side. Now, it's going to keep doing that until it gets to become a full moon, and then it's going to return back, getting darker and darker, becoming a new moon. When the moon is getting lighter and lighter and lighter, we call that waxing. And when the moon is on its way from full to getting darker and darker and darker, we call that waning. The way I like to remember that is the saying, we like to wax the car before it wanes on it. It waxes before it wanes. Getting more lit is waxing. Getting closer to being darker is waning. This phase where we have a sliver of light on either the right side or again down here on the left side during the waning phase, we call this a crescent. And it's what we always think of as a moon shape. I like to think of it like a croissant, those tasty pastries we often have with breakfast. So this is the crescent phase, all the way up until it gets to halfway. Okay, so if we go back and we orbit the moon all the way through those crescent phases to right here, you can see if we looked up from Earth, we'd see half of the moon lit and half of the moon dark. Okay. We refer to that as a first quarter moon. Now the temptation is to call that a half moon, but if you look at, we started here, we have orbited 1/4 of the way around. So if it's about a 27.3 days to orbit around, it's been about 7 days to go from new moon to a first quarter. Now after first quarter, we start getting light over the majority of the moon, past halfway. Okay, and this is going to happen. Again, we're in the waxing phase to begin with. This is getting more and more lit. Now we're more than halfway lit. Okay, we call that a gibbous moon. And a gibbous moon continues until we get all the way to being a full moon. After a full moon, the moon phases go through the same process they did in the beginning, just backwards. So the full moon starts to get a sliver of darkness on the right-hand side. Since the majority of the moon is lit, we call that a gibbous, but now we're getting darker and darker every day on the moon, so this is in the waning phase. A waning gibbous, and then we get to a last quarter. So again, the moon has now gone and orbited to a full moon, new moon, first quarter, full moon, because from Earth we see the only thing we see is the lit side, waning gibbous. Down here, when we look at the moon, we see half of it lit, half of it dark. Okay, so we call this the last quarter. It's 3/4 of the way around. If each section from new moon to first quarter takes about 7 days, and from first quarter to full moon takes about 7 days, and from full moon to last quarter takes about 7 days, we're 14, about 21 days into this 27, 28 day cycle. And then finally, the moon is going to continue to move around. It's going to be a crescent moon again, now a waning crescent lit on the left-hand side until it continues all the way back to where it was initially as a new moon. In summary, the moon is the Earth's only natural satellite. It takes about 27.3 days to complete an orbit around the Earth, just a little bit under a month. The moon reflects its light from the sun. It does not make its own light. It's just like a mirror and reflects the light back to us. The gravity of the moon is responsible for our tides, the rising and falling of our ocean levels, but we'll have more to come about that later. There's often questions on tests about moon phases. As the moon orbits around the Earth, we're able to see different amounts of the lit side. That's what gives us the phases that we see. Beginning at the new moon, a moon that is all dark, the light starts to begin appearing at the right side. We say the right side is the light side. Crescent moons are less than half lit. Gibbous moons are more than half lit. A fully lit moon is called a full moon. Again, an all dark moon is called a new moon. When the moon is in the process of getting more and more lit, it is said to be waxing. Remember, wax the car before it wanes on it. Waxing happens before waning. When the moon is in the process of getting darker, it is said to be waning.